afternoon. I'm Michelle Fopney, the 2021 Dallas Regional Chamber Chair and the Dallas Office Managing Partner for EY. We are so excited to welcome you to the DRC's second annual State of Early Education presented by PNC Bank. As part of our mission to make the Dallas region the best place to live, work, and do business, one of the DRC's priorities is to strengthen Dallas's vibrant business community with a high-quality local talent pipeline, which is only possible by delivering a quality education for all students. And research has consistently shown that the earlier we start investing in our students, the better their outcomes will be. That is why the DRC has long been a staunch advocate of early education. But the COVID-19 pandemic has had a very negative effect on our youngest learners and our early childhood educators in both public schools and childcare settings. As our region looks forward to our economic and academic recovery, revitalizing and supporting our systems of early childhood education will be a key component to achieving success. Today, we will hear from business, education, and civic leaders about the impact of COVID-19 on early childhood education and the path ahead for this critical sector. Our program will also feature a new announcement from Dallas ISD in recognition of Dallas region businesses that have committed to family-friendly benefits and policies in the workplace. Before we begin, though, I want to thank our event sponsors for helping us host this important conversation. Thank you to PNC Bank, today's presenting sponsor, for their generous support. And I also want to thank our VIP sponsors, Dallas College, Educational First Steps, Texas Instruments, and the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas. Now I will hand the program over to Amber Scanlon, Senior Vice President and Director of Client and Community Relations for PNC Bank, who will moderate today's keynote discussion and introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Amber Scanlon, Senior Vice President and Director of Client and Community Relations for PNC Bank. I have the privilege to serve on several boards related to early learning, such as Early Matters Dallas, and I'm also a member of the Texas Early Learning Council, a governor-appointed advisory committee focused on improving early childhood education and care across the state. PNC Bank is proud to be the presenting sponsor for the State of Early Education. This topic is very close to home for us. PNC Grow Up Great is our company's $500 million commitment to early childhood education. Through this signature program at PNC, we work to help underserved children, ages birth to 5, prepare to enter kindergarten ready to learn. While much of our efforts are dedicated to direct services to infants and toddlers in high-quality classrooms and care, advocacy for good early learning public policy at local and state levels is a fundamental part of our work. And on that note, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our guest of honor, Speaker Joe Straus. Speaker Straus served as Speaker of the Texas House from 2009 to 2019, making him the longest serving Republican Speaker in the state history. And with that, I'll give Speaker Straus an opportunity to say hello.
Thank you. Hello, Amber. Thank you. And thanks to PNC Bank and the Dallas Chamber for having me today.
Absolutely. A little bit from Speaker Straus's bio. Under his leadership, the Texas House focused on improving public schools and workforce readiness, funding the state's water plan, and directing billions of additional dollars to transportation improvements, all while balancing the biennial Texas budget amid both prosperous and challenging economic conditions. Speaker Straus also prioritized mental health care and the protection of abused and neglected children. For his thoughtful leadership, the Dallas Morning News named Speaker Straus Texan of the Year in 2017. After leaving the Texas House, Speaker Straus launched Texas Forever Forward to support candidates, emerging leaders, organizations, and causes that are focused on Texas's future, including in areas such as economic growth, public and higher education, inclusivity, mental health care, infrastructure, and civic participation. Speaker Straus is also the co-chairman of Early Matters San Antonio, an organization with chapters in Dallas, Houston, and Austin that is working to rally the local business and civic community around the importance of high-quality early childhood education for all children. Speaker Straus, thank you for joining us today. And with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to our first questions. We may have time at the end of our discussion for a few questions from the audience. So please do use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to submit questions for Speaker Straus, and we'll try to get as many as we can. And with that said, we'll get started. So before we dive into today's discussion, can you please share a bit about your tenure as Speaker of the Texas House and some of the issues you prioritized while serving in that role?
Well, sure. And thank you again, Amber, for having me today. And before I get to the first topic, I want to again thank the Dallas Chamber and a big shout out to my friend Dale Petrovsky for all the good work that he and his team do for the Dallas region every day, and for particularly highlighting this important topic of early education, which is critically important to the business community in your area and all across the state of Texas. I also want to not forget to point out that the reason that strides forward have been made largely is because of the work of Commit. And I know that Dr. Hinojosa is on this Zoom today. So it's really a lot of credit goes to the Dallas business and education advocates community for the advancements that have been made in early childhood education in this state. But to your first question, I was privileged to serve in the legislature for 7 terms, 5 of those as the Speaker of the House, and that's 10 years as the presiding officer. I often joke that it only felt like 20, but it was a privilege, and it was a great opportunity to serve the state and my community. My priorities started with the larger topic of our conversation today, and that's public education, including early childhood education. During my time, we pushed for stronger state investments in public schools so that there was not so much of a funding burden put on Texas property taxpayers to fund public education. And part of that concern really grew from the growing amount of money that the state was taking from local communities through the system known as Robin Hood. And it wasn't only the very wealthy districts that this affected. The problem grew so out of hand that it wasn't just Plano or the district that I live in San Antonio. It was also Dallas Independent School District and Houston and other large districts that really you'd have to stretch to call, property wealthy districts. We didn't always get everything that we wanted as we advocated, but I've always talked about the importance of focusing on what I call the core responsibilities of governing. And it starts with education, particularly public education, but also higher education. And it certainly, as we learned over the last week or 10 days, that it includes infrastructure. And that's, everything from water to roads, and certainly, as we now know, energy. We focused on economic development and jobs. And all of these priorities lead ultimately to job creation. As you mentioned in the bio portion, mental health was a particular major focus during my time in the House, and we made some incredible progress there, which I'm happy is being continued currently. But I really tried more than anything to try to keep the focus of the legislature on these core issues of governing, rather than getting off on some of the more divisive and controversial items that just distract the legislature and don't really do much good for the state. Now, I won some and I lost some on that score, but it was what I always tried to do. And I think that approach was informed by the business community and the business community's focus on needing a strong workforce. So everything that I tried to emphasize during my time of public service in the Texas House was pretty well aligned with the business community, and that's why I again give a big shout out to the Dallas Regional Chamber for all the good work that you do for your members and for policymakers in the state of Texas.
Agreed. Thank you. You mentioned early childhood education as one of your many priorities as speaker. How do you think the political dynamic on early learning has evolved over the past decade? And what role did you have in facilitating that change in the Texas legislature?
Well, I think the shift is a really positive one. 10 years ago, it was maybe a priority for some, but it wasn't at the top of the list and certainly wasn't getting very far. For a long time, there was also a pretty vocal minority, but definitely a minority that was hostile to pre-K. They didn't really see the value or that it was a state's obligation. And to Governor Abbott's credit, when he first took office, he made a push for some more funding for pre-K. And there were some on the other side of the building from where Chairman Anchia and I worked who weren't very friendly to that argument. Some of them even called it godless socialism, which was not very well received in the House. But in those days, the early push from the governor was for a grant program. And so I have to admit that I wasn't all that enthusiastic about something that wasn't a full commitment of the state. But it was an indication of the importance of the issue that developed into a very important part of House Bill 3 and its passage in the last session. But I think it's also important to point out that there was a shift going on in the electorate, and that voters showed, particularly in 2018, that an investment in public education from top to bottom, including pre-K, was really important to them. And the legislature got the message. Pre-K funding had some fits and starts over the years for sure, but when the message finally arrived from the voters that they wanted this to be a priority, the legislature answered the call. And so I think that the politics of this have shifted in a good way, and I think again it's to a large degree because of the advocacy of the business community being proactive about voicing the connection between pre-K and workforce development and jobs. And people see that it really works. We've had a pre-K initiative in the city of San Antonio now for a number of years called Pre-K for SA, using a small portion of our city sales tax to fund it. And it uses evidence-based programs, and it's been a real success. The results in terms of academic preparedness for our youngest children, once they get to first and second and third grades, has been really positive, and it's made a significant difference. So our community down here in South Texas has rallied around that program and just approved the next phase of it in this last November election. So all in all, pre-K is going in the right direction for a lot of reasons.
Excellent. So, of course, the Texas legislature is in session right now. How much of a priority should early childhood education be for lawmakers this session, in your opinion, and particularly as they confront the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, it should always be a priority. All of public education should be priority number one in any session. But I'm also realistic to know that every legislative session is in some way a response to the moment. And this session has been throwing a lot of curveballs already, not only through COVID-19, but the events of the last week have certainly changed the agenda pretty radically. The session was off to a slow start, I think intentionally because of COVID-19. Many people thought that this would be a passive budget and go home session, but now it doesn't appear that that's the case. And it's, you know, some of the ceremonial things that you normally see with the recognitions on the floor and the visits from communities and associations around the state are not happening and been canceled. That's okay. But it just feeds into the perception that not very much is getting done. But I feel that is beginning to change because of the winter storm and the anger and the destabilization that has caused after the last 10 days. But in terms of education, I think one of the most important things that the legislature can do, and many of the leading legislators have shown commitment to this, at least verbally, and that's to protect the investments that were made in House Bill 3 in the session 2 years ago, and other educational investments that were made in that really important bill. So I'm optimistic that they will be good to that word. I feel as though the money, the revenue will be there to make good on that promise. Particularly since the Congress provided $5.5 billion in COVID relief for education in the state. So I think that the legislature should use those funds for school districts who need it, who've been through a really tough year. And that includes pre-K programs. And I think they should address the fact that students have lost a lot of instructional time. And that is a problem that will have lasting implications going forward. So it's a one-time expense, should fit perfect for those stimulus dollars, and I hope the legislature will use those funds not to supplant current spending, but to really help the districts going forward.
So well said. If it's okay, we're going to go back to Early Matters San Antonio for just a second. Obviously, we're enormous fans of the Early Matters organization, certainly here in Dallas. Can you tell us more about Early Matters San Antonio and why you felt it was so important to get involved?
Sure. You know, when I was serving as speaker, I would often be visited by Early Matters Dallas and the group in Austin and Houston and Fort Worth and all around the state. And it occurred to me that San Antonio didn't have an Early Matters type organization. And I think that my community was often left without a voice at the table on these matters. Now, there were education advocates for sure from this part of the state, but I really felt like it was important to have a seat at the table with peers from other communities in the state. And so I do think San Antonio understands and recognizes the importance of early education and how it affects all of us, and the quality of our workforce and the future of our economy. So just like Dallas, the business community in San Antonio decided that their support and their voice was necessary. And I'm glad that it exists now. It's bipartisan. It's an effort in San Antonio, referring again now to the pre-K for essay program, using a quarter of our existing sales tax for early childhood education. And I have to give credit to our former mayor and housing secretary, Julian Castro, for really creating and implementing this program in San Antonio. I also have to admit that when he first started pushing for this, I wasn't its biggest fan. I didn't oppose it because I could see that the state of Texas wasn't stepping up for a strong commitment for pre-K education. But at the same time, I had some concerns that public education really wasn't what local government was created to be responsible for. But I'm glad that it passed, and I'm glad that the program has proven to be such a big success. It creates early childhood opportunities for low-income families in San Antonio. Provides grants for teacher training. It has some effect on other childcare providers in the community, and the proof of its success, I think, is that it was just recently re-extended by the voters of San Antonio in November of 2020 and got 73% of the vote. So that proves that it works and it's popular, and I'm glad that we have it.
Excellent, excellent work. We have a great group of business leaders in the audience today. Can you tell us, in your opinion, the business case for early childhood education, and also why and how should business leaders get involved with this critical issue?
Well, sure. And I've already, pointed out the good work of the chamber and your business leaders that have been very effective advocates for policymakers in Austin. But I've also very often made the comment that public education is the greatest economic development tool that we have. Business relocation decisions, and Dallas has been the Dallas region has been the greatest beneficiary of those moving their business headquarters from other states to Texas. And we know the importance of the ability to offer outstanding education opportunities to the children of employees of these businesses moving. We also all know the anecdotal stories of CEOs and CEOs' spouses who will move, who are prospective residents of Dallas or Austin or San Antonio, who's one of the first questions they ask and one of the first things they do when they're looking at residential neighborhoods, for example, is where will our kids go to school? And so the business case is really a clear one, an easy one to be made, and one that fortunately the business community gets in Texas. And on the subject of early education, I think that it is such an important investment in a better workforce. It'll help attract more business to Texas over time. The program in San Antonio, Pre-K for SA, that's been in existence now for 8 years, has proven to be a big boost to our local economy, and a great recruiting tool for our economic development leaders. And things just don't pass with 73% of the vote anywhere without that being definitely proved to the people of our communities.
Absolutely. We're going to go ahead and take a few questions from the audience. So first comes from CEO of Texans Care for Children, Stephanie Rubin. Speaker Straus has raised strong concerns about Texas's high uninsured rate. How does he see the connection between family access to health and mental health care to early childhood success?
Well, that's a great question. And I think you raise a really important point that's only become much more critical in this last trying year of COVID-19 and people being isolated. There's no question, not just in the learning loss of young people that will take years if they ever can regain it, but in the mental health toll of all the citizens who feel the sense of isolation, of disconnectedness, and on the part of our young people, that is particularly acute. They can't do the things that they're accustomed to doing. Just normal ways of growing up and being around other young people is severely limited. That's leading to some really important mental health problems and depression, incidents of depression, and I fear suicidal tendencies as well. So all of the work that we've done previously in mental health in Texas, I think, couldn't have come at a better time. And I think that all of this, the events of the last year only underscore the importance of continuing that focus going forward.
Our second question, should the state look at a sales tax model just like San Antonio has adopted?
Well, the first thing I think the state needs to do in terms of early childhood education is just be good to the commitment that was made 2 years ago to fully fund the pre-K program for all eligible students. The advantage that we have through pre-K and SA going forward, as the state hopefully continues its commitment, is that we have excess funds to reach deeper into our community to provide full day pre-K, quality full day pre-K, beyond just those who qualify for it currently. We have the opportunity to reach down into the community to families that want to access it, but may have financial, may not have the financial capability to do so. Whether or not there can be a statewide sales tax approach to this, I kind of doubt. But I do think that local communities who have the room to do it, or who make the room to do it and prioritize early childhood education, ought to look at San Antonio as a model where it's appropriate.
Thank you. Next question is from Lynette Greenhaw. What is the next investment and policy change you think is needed by the legislature to keep the progress moving on improving early childhood education and high quality pre-K?
Well, I hate to have be accused of having low expectations, but if the state will just maintain the commitment that it made 2 years ago, which we probably need to be reminded was an excellent bill and an excellent start, but on the challenging side, it wasn't funded in a sustainable way, because the other half of the equation was property tax relief, and that becomes very expensive over time. And so before talking about doing more, which I'm all in favor of, we need to find ways to make sure that what has been done is sustainable and is sustained. So once that is achieved, and that's not an easy achievement, I do think there are other things that can be done. And we had a discussion in the VIP chat room before this event began with Tori and others about the importance of the ages between 0 and 3 before pre-K, those early years where childhood, it isn't just childhood education, but it's child care, and the ability to assist working families with their child care needs is something that every community has a stake in, and something that I think should be looked at as maybe the next step when it can be taken.
And finally, our last question for you. You've been so generous with your time. The last 12 months have been really hard for students and teachers alike. Can you please share a story that gives you hope in this time?
Well, there's so many stories of Texans' resilience in this time. And it just over the last week, I mean, it's just, I don't know if you're like me, you almost, for a week or 10 days, you almost forgot that we were in a pandemic, because we had an even more critical crisis right in front of us, affecting virtually everyone in the state. It was either freezing or going without water, immobilized, angry, and there are incredible stories just from the last 10 days of frontline workers making repairs to our utility systems. I live in San Antonio, which is the headquarters and home of H-E-B Grocery, which I know extends only into your area through Central Market. but through much of the state, HEB grocery has been, an incredible lifeline for people. So I think that just looking at frontline workers, teachers, healthcare workers, neighbors checking on neighbors, the stories are numerous. I also want to, point out that there are many, not just celebrities and politicians, but many community leaders around the state have pitched into food banks, have really stepped up and shown a commitment to fellow citizens. And this is the point I tried to always remember when Raphael and I would be faced with some of the divisive, not very productive issues in the legislature, is that basically I really have this belief that Texans are good, and that we do step up and help one another, and that's what's going to get us through not just the pandemic, which is challenging enough, but the events of the last 10 days. So great question. And there are, I know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of examples of Texans that are standing up to help one another. And it's the Texan thing to do, and something that we can all be proud of.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Speaker Straus, for the thoughtful conversation today. We certainly appreciate your time. It's absolutely been an honor to spend this time with you, and we really thank you for your continued leadership for our state. Thank you again.
Thank you, Amber. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. I would be honored to introduce Dr. Michael Hinojosa, our Superintendent of Dallas Independent School District, and he's going to be making a special announcement. Dr. H.
Well, thank you very much. And I really want to thank, as you're pulling up my slide, what I really want to thank is, first of all, Speaker Straus. I'm going to dovetail on one of the comments he made about the future, and that's what I'm going to be making an announcement on. But it would be premature for me to get there without thanking the Chamber with Dale and Drex and all their outstanding leadership that they do for this whole entire community. And Rafael Anchia, as a former board member in Dallas, and I was doing great statesman work in Austin. We want to thank him. And there are a lot of great people in this business community. What I love, the reason I came back to Dallas a second time is because I love this city and I love this district, and we have so many people who stepped up, including people like Commit, Early Matters, and many other companies that are on this call. So I want to talk to you. We're announcing the launch of Project Legacy 2050. 2050 project. This is a long-term project. I will be 94 years old in 2050, but if we don't start planning for it now, we're never going to get there. And we have people, our friends are working on Texas 2036. And then I know Dallas Thrives has some bold, hairy, audacious goals for 2040. Well, I'm going to argue that none of it can get done if we don't prioritize what I'm about to talk to you about. On the screen, you see a quote from Dr. Ron Ferguson. Now, urban superintendents in Texas went to a presentation last fall and where we heard about racial equity. And one piece of the presentation was about the passion. And then the other one was about the substance. Both are very important. But what I'm going to talk to you about right now is the substance. And Dr. Ferguson's quote, and Dr. Ferguson is an economist trained by MIT, and he is now at the Kennedy School at Harvard. And what he made a tremendous pitch about, we're doing great with pre-K. And our pre-K initiative, the kids that have been in Dallas pre-K are 2 years ahead of kids that go to no pre-K. But we may have our ladder leaning against the wrong wall, because actually 0 to 2 as 0 to 3, as the speaker just identified, may be where we might need to start focusing on if we're really going to solve this issue long term. If you go to the next slide, here's what it talks about the why. It's related to the economy. It's related to our students. And if you think about our students, there's about 230,000 students, 0 to 5, and 56% of those are in poverty, and 75% of those are ethnic minorities, with the largest portion being African Americans, even though they make up a much smaller proportion of the total population. And as we're thinking about this, every time we study one of these issues in Dallas, in Southern Dallas, and in Pleasant Grove, and in maybe the Love Field, Brock Bank area of North Dallas. It's the same heat maps where there are no restaurants, there are no hospitals, there's no Starbucks, there are no grocery stores. We had limited connectivity until Operation Connectivity got us there. It's the same heat maps. And a lot of this was caused by redlining, we just have to admit. So as we go to the next slide, a lot of things happen for these children in the very developmental age. And I stumbled on this by happenstance. I was a 21-year-old dad. I got a young lady pregnant when I was in college. That son turned out to be great because we both loved him and my family helped get him. He graduated from Texas Tech in 3 years and now he runs the American division of a British company. But he was successful because of the wraparound services we gave him. He actually has a higher IQ than my two boys that went to Harvard and Princeton. The reason my boys went to Harvard and Princeton is because I married up. My wife was a pre-K English teacher that was reading to these boys before they were born and I was making fun of her. Middle-class families, that's what we do. That's not what our kids in poverty get. In fact, if they get a meal, if they get a hug, it is an amazing accomplishment. Now, don't get me wrong. We're not necessarily the providers. Kind of like the Dallas County Promise says that if you want to go to college, money shouldn't be an excuse because you'll either get this through the grants you qualify for, but then Dallas College or UNT Dallas will be the last dollar to help you get what you need to get. Well, maybe that's what way we need to look at this initiative. And so, because it has a huge impact on this future and the viability of this community. It's education, it's the economy, and it's equity all laid out for you. And this involves social emotional skills, brain development. 80% of the brain develops before the third birthday. And if we let this happen by accident, and not by design, then shame on us. And we see the evidence. So let's go to the last slide. This slide, and I'm real pleased that most of my board members that I've spoken to, we've given them a briefing. We're gonna go deep on this briefing in March. They are excited about this opportunity. We don't know where we're gonna go because we got to 2050 to get this resolved, but we gotta start now. But here's 3 ways you can get involved. But we're also going to set up some structures with some great, we're going to set up a kitchen cabinet, an executive committee, and a guiding coalition. Read an article one time from the Harvard Business School. Big things fail, transformations fail because there's not a sense of urgency and there's not a guiding coalition. We were successful in Operation Connectivity because we had both. Now but that was an operation. This is a project. This is going to last a long time. We have people who are ready to sign up and help us, including informal childcare, formal childcare, parent education, children's support, and of course, advocacy groups and government. We're also going to need the medical community to help us down this journey for the long haul. So I pitched this after we heard Dr. Ferguson in January. My team put the plan together. We went back and met with the Urban Council, and in San Antonio and in all of these districts, all of the 8 urban metro areas, every district has said we're in. They've signed on. They don't know the what yet because we're going to develop the what, but they're in to the why. And then I met with the Dallas County superintendents, and virtually all of them have signed on with this plan too. So this is our soft launch. We're going to be putting a lot of plans together. I want to thanks to the Chamber for giving me this opportunity to actually support Joe Straus and what he had just laid out as to the long term. How do we fund this? Who knows? That's too early for that. We just need to start talking about how when the child is going to the hospital, when the mother's going to the hospital to get ready to give childbirth, she has the opportunity to start the process of literacy, and that we take care of our families from the beginning. So thank you very much. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hinojosa, for that exciting announcement. The DRC and our broader business community are incredibly grateful to have visionary leaders such as yourself working to improve outcomes for the students of Dallas ISD and our larger region. Especially with a renewed focus on the 0 to 3 ages. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our State of Early Education this afternoon. My name is Michael Wood, and I am the Director of Education and Workforce for the Dallas Regional Chamber. And it is my pleasure to moderate today's panel discussion. So I will introduce our panelists. So Dominique McCain is the Managing Director of Best in Class for the Commit Partnership. In this role, Dominique works to ensure that every child throughout the state has access to a high-quality educator. Dominique also leads commits engagement in pre-K through third grade. Welcome, Dominique. Great to see you. The Honorable Rafael Anchia is serving his 9th term as state representative for Texas House District 103, which encompasses the western corridor of Dallas County, including the cities of Dallas, Farmers Branch, and Irving. Chairman Anchia currently serves as the chairman of the Pensions, Investment, and Financial Services Committee. Prior to his time in the Texas House, and as Dr. Hinojosa mentioned, Chairman Anchia was twice elected to the Dallas ISD Board of Trustees. Welcome, Chairman, and thank you so much for being here. And finally, Vicki Allen is the president and CEO of Educational First Steps, which works to transform childcare centers in historically underserved communities into nationally accredited centers of high quality early childhood education. Vicki's passion is education and ensuring that all children have access to the highest quality early childhood education possible. It's great to see you, Vicki. So with introductions out of the way, we will jump right into our discussion. Again, thank you to all of our panelists for being with us this afternoon in this virtual setting. Chairman Anchia, I understand that you have some emergency state business to attend to that'll take you off of this panel a little earlier than scheduled. So I'm going to start with our questions for you, if that's all right. So first and foremost, Chairman Anchia, can you briefly explain what role the Texas Legislature plays in overseeing and administering early childhood education and care throughout the state?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and thank you to the Regional Chamber for having me on today, to all the stakeholders who are participating. It's a pleasure to also be on with Dominique and Vicki, who are far greater subject matter experts than me. We do play an important role at the state because not only do we provide appropriations for child development centers, but through the Texas Workforce Commission, we also administer a program related to early child development. And I got to tell you, just in terms of where the legislature is today, it is light years ahead of where we were just a short time ago. I remember working with a Republican member from Arlington, Diane Patrick, back in 2009 to pass a statewide pilot program for early childhood. It was a limited program, about $200 million. And interestingly enough, Governor Perry then vetoed it, citing that it was going to be an entitlement. Well, fast forward about a decade later, and in the 2019 session, we made a commitment to our public education system and to young people in the state, and we finally lived up to the promise of all of the scholarship that's been done on early childhood, and invested in it, now making it available on a universal basis for 4-year-olds and sort of increasing our pre-kinder offerings. That's really important to me as a legislator, but it's also important to me personally. My mother was a first grade bilingual education teacher in Dade County Public Schools. She did it for 30 years as an immigrant from Mexico. I watched her go to community college, graduate from community college, graduate from our neighborhood 4-year university, and then dedicate herself to that public service for first graders. And it made a big difference to her when kids would come in with readiness in reading and in the basic skills that they would need for first grade. And it made her job either a lot harder or a lot easier, depending on how early a child started school. The other thing that is really important to me, and I want to give a shout out to Educational First Steps, is that as a baby lawyer back in, well, I won't say when, before the web browser was invented, let's say that, my first foray into public service was when I went to a Get On Board fair by the Center for Nonprofit Management. And I got connected with Alicia Escobar, and we helped found the Ser Child Development Center in the Love Field area. And I was the second board chair. And Educational First Steps, we contracted with them, and they really walked us through how to get set up and how to deliver high quality services. So big shout out to that organization. The legislature can play an important role by funding through appropriations and then also by administering funds that go through the Texas Workforce Commission for early childhood programs.
Thank you, Chairman and Chia. That's certainly helpful context for our audience. I'm going to continue with a question for you. I recognize that you are a member of the newly formed Early Childhood Caucus in the Texas Legislature. What are the objectives of that caucus this legislative session, recognizing the tight budget cycle that we're in, both as it relates to COVID-19 and now potentially the crisis of this last week's winter storm?
I always try to talk at least once when mute is on during a meeting, so I've hit my quota. So look, early on this session, I think Republicans and Democrats locked arms and said we were going to keep our promises in HB 3 from last session, and that includes helping that infrastructure of early childhood providers that many of whom are in a very precarious position as a result of the pandemic. We've heard from people around the state when I was the chair of International Relations and Economic Development. We had a town hall on this issue and heard from providers around the state that the pandemic was really impacting them, not only through higher costs because of COVID protocols, but also through lower student populations because of the pandemic. A lot more people were keeping their kids at home, which was impacting their viability. So we established this early childhood caucus in the Texas Legislature as a clearinghouse, not only for information, but for sharing ideas and experiences on legislation and really holding the legislature to its promise that we made in HB 3, and then improving on that promise, saying, hey, it's not enough just to have universal childcare for four-year-olds. We need to have high quality childcare, and the quality really does matter in long-term educational outcomes. So this caucus, again, is going to serve as a place for us to meet, share ideas, and then if there are bills or efforts to unwind some of the commitments we've made on early childhood, that's a place where we also sound the alarm and marshal forces to defeat those efforts.
Thank you, Chairman. And we're certainly excited to see that caucus take shape this year and look forward to the work that it will do to advance outcomes for our youngest learners. Vicki and Dominique, I'm going to transition to a question for both of you. Can you, at a high level, share how your respective organizations engage in early childhood education? Vicki, let's start with you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Honorable Raphael and Chia, for the shout out and also for the partnership. EFS partners with over 100 childcare centers and 50 home-based providers across North Texas. And we've been doing that for over 30 years. And our goal has remained the same. And that is to provide the highest quality learning experience for children and also ignite the minds at the same time of kids from birth to age 5. We use a framework that we refer to as the 4 Steps to Excellence, which is an evidence-based training, mentoring, and comprehensive resource tool that's all provided at no cost to teachers, families, and communities to position them for long-term to achieve national accreditation. What we realize at EFS is that early childhood education is an investment, and the National Forum on Early Childhood Policy and Programs have found that high quality early childhood programs can yield a $4 to $9 return on a $1 investment. And by investing in high quality early childhood education, our hope is to close learning gaps for young children, break cycles of poverty for families, and create a brighter, more economically and racially equitable community for all. And we do that with a commitment to build strong collaborative partnerships that enhance the overall effectiveness of the education ecosystem.
Thank you, Vicki. We certainly appreciate everything Educational First Steps does. Dominique?
Thank you, Michael. That's going to be a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. I'll start with the Commit partnership because I think for the audience, it's important to really understand the relationship between Commit, Early Matters Dallas, and Best in Class, since you mentioned it in my introduction. And I'll start with just sharing that Commit is a community navigator and connector. And our goal really is to ensure that all North Texas students are receiving an excellent and equitable education. You aren't going to hear much different from me than what you heard from Vicki, because we do have very similar missions in terms of the work that we're doing. Specifically though, as a backbone organization, Commit's portfolio spans the learning continuum for students. The early childhood education work is mostly supported by our Early Matters Dallas team, and Early Matters Dallas, which is not a new name to this audience either, is a broad-based coalition of organizations that really work together to raise awareness about and advocate for exactly what Vicki mentioned, the importance of high quality early education to the end of a strong economy for tomorrow, as well as ensuring that students who are being served in our community are getting the very best that we have to give them, both through high impact equity center strategies that we're working through with school districts, as well as our partnerships with many of the people in this room who are a part of organizations that make up this coalition. For Best in Class, I'll mention we are a joint venture with the Communities Foundation of Texas. And so that gives us the opportunity to access additional resources. And the efforts from that coalition are specifically catered toward really having high quality, effective teachers in front of every child every day. And so when you bring all of that together, what you have in, the tactical sense of our work is we're just continuously advocating for increased financial resources that get allocated to really the high critical, the critical high return on investment area of early childhood. We do that through, you heard the Honorable Anchia mention, readiness as a big part of what his mother was trying to optimize on with her students. That has not changed for teachers. That has not changed for early childhood teachers. And so in our efforts, we're really pushing to support kindergarten readiness, third grade reading readiness, because we recognize that investing early really leads to stronger outcomes for students later, that then become their opportunity to access all that our world has available to them, including helping them to get out of poverty in the instances where that's necessary. And so all of this work kind of culminates, if you will, in my opinion, in a way that really shows in our region specifically, we are pushing and working hard to make sure that our students have the very best educators and the very best quality environments that are available to them.
Thank you, Dominique. Vicki, I'm going to go back to you and touch on a point that Chairman Anchia brought up. Childcare providers have been drastically impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and now last week's winter storm, with enrollment declining and operating costs increasing. How have childcare providers broadly grappled with these crises, and what does the path look like? What does the path ahead look like for this industry?
Yes. First of all, I have to say childcare providers are by far some of the most resilient leaders I have ever met, because they have truly endured challenges that most would literally fail at because it is overwhelming. But what I will say is that, first of all, we have developed a deep commitment of collaboration amongst the ECE community, as Dominique said, with Commit and Early Matters Dallas, Childcare Group, and Childcare Associates. We all came together and created weekly calls so that communication was strong. And Commit and Early Matters Dallas led an effort to bring us together to lean on each other and leverage each other's strengths. So I think in the very beginning, we started out as a coalition and came together as one to support childcare providers. I also believe that within their own organizations, they have leveraged strategies from reducing hours rather than closing centers to keep staff engaged. And one of the reasons why they did that is because they recognize the importance of retaining their employees throughout this pandemic, because the ability to retrain teachers and get them prepared and start all over again is really hard. And we know kids require consistency. And so they have really tried to keep that consistent teacher in front of kids throughout this, in spite of having reduced enrollments, low revenue numbers, and all of the increased costs that come with the pandemic, as well as the increased costs that they're enduring now because of Winter Storm Uri. And the road, as all of us have shared on this call, is a tough one. I mean, there is no denying that the childcare industry is fragile. It is going to need, because it's undercapitalized overall, and it's going to require a higher level of investment. And I think that all of us together have the ability to be able to pull together strategies that both leverage our resources, talents, and skills to help an industry that we all know is instrumental both to our economy and to our long-term vitality as one of the leading sectors in this field.
Thank you, Vicki. Dominique, I'll pivot to in-person or pre-K through third grade learning with this question. So statewide data shows that Texas's youngest students are among the least likely to be learning in person amid the pandemic, yet may struggle the most with remote learning, with outcomes not being as good as they would be if they were in person. What has been the impact of COVID-19 on our public school system's youngest learners, as well as those that teach them?
Well, thank you so much for that question, Michael. I'll start with what we've learned just in terms of the data around enrollment. Pre-K enrollment is currently down 22% across the state of Texas. And in Dallas County, it's down 16%. And so what we recognize is, one, our students are not getting access to that in-person learning that you're talking about specifically. And this is a concern across all of our demographics, because what our data has also helped us to understand about pre-K and the consistency of having students enrolled in pre-K is that it has a substantial impact on that child's kindergarten readiness and then their likelihood to be reading proficiently by third grade. It's also of concern because recent studies have just given us data that indicates in-person instruction, as you mentioned, to be more effective for our most vulnerable students than some of the current virtual settings. We've also had some data come in from Dallas ISD that shows that with regard to kindergarten readiness, there have been some slight declines in specifically vocabulary and social emotional engagement and learning, and some sizable losses in math. We've looked at map assessment data that statewide has our economically disadvantaged students in fourth grade reading down by 5% and math down by 11%. And so in general, we recognize and understand that for early grade students, early age students, elementary grade students, the losses are great, and COVID has had a huge impact. I'll also share, we've done some things like send out surveys in partnership with KERA to parents. And after surveying parents have shared with us their biggest concern is safety. And so what we recognize is we have to put forth some really concerted effort to make sure that our parents are aware that our campuses and our schools are safe, and that they get some of the grain size detail around what campuses and schools are doing to maintain that safety. Because broadly speaking, parents do have their children's health as their number one concern. And we recognize that is a tension that we can't avoid. But what we think we can do is really create some more awareness around what are all of the precautions that are being taken? What are all of the different actions and steps that are being taken to mitigate some of the concerns around safety that students and parents may be feeling? I think the other thing that I will share is that our teachers, by far and large, when filling out surveys and giving us feedback, they are absolutely committed to things that we saw supported by House Bill 3, such as the reading academies. We know that, targeted instruction around literacy and reading based on the science of teaching reading is critically important. But what our teachers have also made us very well aware of is that they are overwhelmed and that they need additional time. They are not trying to, get away from or not be held accountable to the standards that we've set for them. They are committed to that. I think they've shown that in their persistence and their perseverance in this time. And yet we do have to acknowledge and recognize that they too have a threshold. And so how do we balance ensuring that we're still providing these really strong supports for them in terms of building their competencies, excuse me, while also recognizing they too need a break and need to have us building in some really critical additional time for them so that they don't feel they need to crunch and press everything into one small amount of time. I hope that answers your question, Michael, but I think from a qualitative perspective, we know our teachers are a bit overwhelmed, and we know our parents are, really grappling with how do they make the decision of whether or not they want their children engaged in in-person learning again.
Yeah. Thank you, Dominique. No, that was a perfect response. Chairman Nchia, I know you have to depart soon, so I'll direct this next question that's intended for all of you to you first. From your perspective, what role will early childhood education play in facilitating a recovery from this pandemic, both from an economic standpoint as well as an academic standpoint?
Yeah, look, I'm really glad that Dominique mentioned the need for some sort of downtime for our teachers. And by downtime, I don't mean abandoning ship and heading to Cancun. I mean, what I'm talking about is just regular time that teachers need to plan, to think long-term, to do sometimes one-on-one work with students that have fallen behind. To suggest that just that class time schedule is all teachers do it misses the mark by a lot. There's a ton of planning, and anybody who's ever tried to stand in front of a class of 30 middle schoolers, which I've unsuccessfully done many times trying to talk to them about civics, what a hard task this is. And if you have a 30 to 35 first graders in your class, my hats off to anybody who does that. So I just wanted to really elevate that discussion point that Dominique brought up. In terms of kind of where we're headed, Dallas has done a terrific job, and Dr. May and Dr. Hinojosa teaming up to make sure that we're creating a cohort of early childhood teachers at scale. Because it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to offer universal childcare or universal a pre-K for 4-year-olds, and then not have the teacher corps to effectively execute on that promise, right? So Dr. May and Dr. Hinojosa, I know the chamber, they've all locked arms to make sure that is a big priority for Dallas County. And once we have some longitudinal data on that, I suspect, and Dominique will probably bring it to us in a couple of years, but I suspect you're going to see a big increase in readiness, and third grade reading scores are going to go way, way up. But we're just in the infancy of that. What we have to make sure is that we don't get discouraged by the pandemic or by this winter storm, and make sure that we redouble our commitment to early childhood. In terms of it being playing a pivotal role in the recovery, you're correct to point out that, really this legislative session is going to be divided up into two parts, in my view. Is the first part, and it's been exacerbated by the winter freeze. We have to stabilize the populace. People were in dire need of relief, economic relief and other relief, even before this winter storm left 4.5 million people without electricity and about 12 million Texans without potable water. So you add that on top of what was already a fragile populace, and we really at the state and federal level need to be stabilizing our state. Okay, just getting people back to zero, because people are right now, they're hurting. And then after that, in terms of recovery, early childhood education plays a huge role. We know that women in the workforce have been impacted most gravely by the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. I'm sure your prior speakers mentioned that, but a lot of women have had to leave the workforce in material numbers because they just had nowhere else to turn in terms of childcare. And so we need to get those women back into the workforce, and that'll do. The only way to do that is by making sure that they have a place to put their children that is enriched and safe and fulfilling for that family. And that's the only way we really start on the road to recovery, is by bolstering families, getting them the resources they need to excel. I will tell you, that when my mom was at community college, she would go at night. She was working during the day. And the only reason, she would drop me off, and it was kind of a hodgepodge, right? Sometimes she'd drop me off at the early childhood center. Sometimes she'd drop me off with my godmother's mother. Sometimes she'd drop me off with my grandmother, depending on what her work schedule was. And that's how Texas families are trying to do it right now. I mean, it's just catch as catch can, and a really important role in the recovery for the legislature and for the Child Development Center infrastructure, which has been said before is fragile, is to help stabilize these families and put them on the road to recovery, let women get back into the workforce, which is desperately needed, which will bring buying power back into families and help them thrive and recover.
Well, thank you, Chairman Nchia. I appreciate your insight, and I understand you might have to leave us before we get to the next question. So thank you again for spending some time with us this afternoon. I really appreciate your insight today and the work you do for all of us here.
Big shout out to Dominique and Vicki. Thank you for having me. Look forward to meeting in person once we all get vaccinated, and to Drex Owusu, Dale Petrovsky, and the folks at the Dallas Chamber. Michael, thanks for bringing us together. Bye-bye now.
Take care. Okay, well, I will pose that same question to both of you, Dominique and Vicki. So I'll repeat it for your benefit. Vicki, I'll start with you. What role will early childhood education, and particularly our childcare providers, play in facilitating a recovery from this pandemic?
Yes. First of all, I just want to say I'm super excited about Legacy 2050. Because I think Dr. Hinojosa's plan really does speak to the recovery conversation, and that vision encompasses the ability to be able to ensure that we are prepared to be able to care for, but also pivot in a strong direction around early childhood education. So first, I'll start with economic. Chairman Nchia spoke about this earlier, but that women play a critical role in childcare. And we want to make sure that in this recovery plan, that those skills, talents, and expertise that they bring to the workplace are not lost as a result of that. But also too, North Texas is a strong economic community. I mean, I'm relocated here from Minneapolis because of it. And so we want to ensure, I think, from a recovery standpoint, that as the economy comes back, because I believe it will, it's an economy that has the ability to be positioned once jobs come back, recovery come back, the strength of this entire region comes back. We want to have childcare centers that are still standing. And if they go away, we have the potential to not have resources there for parents to be able to leverage that infrastructure. I think from an academic standpoint, and Dominique, I'm sure is going to speak to this in a much more deeper way, but I think that we don't want to lose all of the ground that we've gained up to this point. And it's going to be critical because early childhood education really does focus on that 0 to 3 in terms of the brain development. 90% of brain development happens during that phase of a child's life. And in order to ensure that they're ready to transition to pre-K, childcare is going to be a key differentiator in our economy. And I think that's what attracts people to this region, is that we do have strong academic opportunities for parents and families. And the recovery is really going to be a collaborative one, but it's going to be focused on ensuring that we're ready for the next pandemic, that we're building infrastructure around pieces that allow for the strength of our sector to grow in a dynamic way, but also in a way that creates success for kids across the board. And that is for kids that are in poverty and kids that are, racially diverse. They have to be a part of that recovery conversation, and equitable access has to be a part of that lens that we look through as well.
Thank you, Vicki. Dominique, I'd love your thoughts on this question.
Sure, Michael. Similarly to both Chairman Anchia and Vicki, I think we definitely have to just stay the course. And I say stay the course in, as we've encountered this pandemic and also the winter storm, I know there is this kind of gut reaction and urgency to do something else. But what I will say is all of the efforts and all of the work over the past few years that have gone into really grounding our coalition of advocates in why early childhood education is so critical and important has to continue and has to persist. We cannot abandon what we're already doing because we've worked so hard to get here. And yet there is more that we will have to do. And I think where the more comes into play is being a lot more strategic in how we're using the time that is available to us. When we think about education and a school day, right, we have opportunities through House Bill 3 for additional school time and additional opportunities for students to be exposed to high quality instruction. And all of that is going to be so critical as we think about recovery. But another really important piece to recovery is it's going to require a bit of a culture change in education, in my opinion. And that culture change is really centered around, beginning to push ourselves to think beyond remediation and intervention and to think about acceleration. One of the biggest opportunities for us to exercise equity in education is exposing students to on grade level instruction, on grade level academic content, high quality instructional materials. And all of those things are rooted and grounded in research that we know will help to advance our students beyond the pandemic. We have to acknowledge that our kids now will need to at least gain a year and a half, if not 2 years of learning in a school year. And we haven't been able to get there yet. But I do believe that this is an opportunity for us to innovate, think about school differently from the perspective of accelerating students' learning, not putting them in these cycles of intervention and remediation, but pushing forward and recognizing that, as a state, we have strong standards that are written at a rigor level that really is important for us to maintain and push our teachers, our early childhood educators, everyone to understand that if we can push ourselves to that rigor level, it will actually advance our students and accelerate their learning. Said a different way and to keep it a little bit more simple, what we've traditionally done for gifted and talented students, we should be doing for all students, which is when they enter the classroom at whatever grade level, we expose them to on grade level learning so that we can then advance them as quickly as possible. And what that really looks like, Michael, is the system changing to meet the needs of students. And that is what I believe is the greatest opportunity we have as a result of the pandemic and even the winter storm. We know we have schools that have been impacted. We have school districts that are working vigorously to try to get whatever opportunities for learning available to students again, because for students who were in person now, some of them can't be because schools are damaged. So it's gonna take us continuing to persist, continuing to push ourselves beyond saying, hey, let's throw away everything we've already done and start from zero. We don't have to think of it that way. We have to persist in what we've already put so much effort and so many resources behind and continue to move forward to help our students accelerate in their learning over time.
Thank you, Dominique and Vicki, for those responses. I think I can speak for all of us when I say that we're grateful to have individuals like you leading that charge. I feel a lot better about our chances and your two hands for sure. I have one final question for the two of you. We, of course, have a great audience this afternoon of business and community leaders from both North Texas and across the state here with us today. What is your call to action for those in attendance to help ensure that our institutions of early education are equipped to play the role in pandemic recovery that you both just spoke about? Dominique, I'll kick it right back to you.
Absolutely. I think the first call to action is as informed citizens, right? Reaching out to our representatives and our legislators to make sure that they are prioritizing early childhood education. We all have that opportunity, and I think we should all take it. I think the other call to action I would say is, we have been for the last few years working on this collaborative regional effort around pre-K enrollment. Our pre-K enrollment opens April 1st, and I'm going to encourage everyone to push everyone that you know who has a child that is pre-K age to enroll in pre-K. We have that opportunity right now, and so that would be my call to action for the audience.
Thank you, Dominique. Vicki?
So I actually have two call to actions, Michael. The first one is really reaching out to our legislators and asking for their support in increasing greater childcare reimbursements rates for infants and toddlers. On average, infant cost is higher anyway, but it costs 60% more to provide infant care than it is pre-K, and yet subsidy rates are just 27% higher. And in that model, it's an unsustainable framework for those working in childcare, but most importantly, for those working with parents who are overburdened as it is. I also think the consequences of this have played out across both our region and our nation, and that families losing access to childcare ultimately hurts the child in terms of their ability to be able to thrive long-term. And the second one is that I have a great deal of respect for childcare workers and the childcare sector, but I think they're grossly underpaid. On average, $10.72 is the average hourly rate. And as we know, that is not sustainable long-term. This is a highly professional sector that brings with it a group of passionate, dedicated, committed leaders who prepare our youngest learners. And the system can't thrive at operating at the expense of underpaid professionals, and many are leaving the field. And unfortunately, they're leaving the field at a time when we need them most, because when recovery happens, we're going to need their long-term tenure in the classroom to be able to help that. And I just believe that those two call to actions will both couple our recovery, but also position our children for long-term success moving forward.
Thank you, Vicki. We certainly appreciate our childcare workers and our teachers who are certainly on the front line of this pandemic, and appreciate both of your time this afternoon. We really appreciate you being on this panel, in addition to Chairman Nchia, who departed a little earlier. Again, we just thank you deeply for the work you do every day to support our youngest learners and their families. Our communities are certainly better for your leadership. Now I will hand it over to Brendan McGuire, Regional President and Head of Corporate Banking for PNC Bank, and the Chairman of the Dallas Regional Chamber's Education and Workforce Council, to recognize Dallas region companies that have received the Best Place for Working Parents designation. Brendan, over to you.
Well, thanks, Michael, and thank you to all of our speakers for a great discussion today. We really appreciate you spending your afternoon with us to talk about these important issues. As Amber noted earlier, PNC Bank is a proud corporate champion for early childhood education, and that's why we were so excited to support the DRC in launching the Best Place for Working Parents Dallas, a new initiative recognizing family-friendly workplaces in the North Texas region, and to raise awareness on the importance of family-friendly benefits and policies. Like you, we believe strongly in the importance of family-friendly policies for all employees in the workplace. These policies, such as paid maternity and paternity leave, flexible hours and accommodations, and childcare assistance, can benefit a company's bottom line. From a regional workforce perspective, as employers, we all have a continued need for the best talent. Family-friendly policies can improve employee retention, satisfaction, and productivity while offering critical support for working parents and their families. They also help employers rise to the top in terms of a job seeker's consideration, and can help keep North Texas a great place to live, work, and do business. The Best Place for Working Parents Dallas utilizes a first-of-its-kind business self-assessment to allow employers to quickly determine whether their company qualifies for this recognition by comparing family-friendly policies and benefits to other companies of similar size in the industry and the region. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the first group of North Texas businesses designated as a Best Place for Working Parents Dallas. These companies have each demonstrated a commitment to fostering a family-friendly work environment through many different policies, including dependent healthcare coverage, remote working options, and on-site childcare. Please join me in giving these companies and their leaders a virtual round of applause. We are proud of the example these employers have set and call on every employer in the North Texas region to complete the self-assessment and consider opportunities to strengthen their policies and benefits that support working parents. If your company or employer hasn't completed this assessment, we encourage you to go to the DRC website to do so. In addition, the DRC website also discusses recommended family-friendly policies that we consider best in class for working parents. Finally, we hope you will spread the word about this important recognition and use the accolades in your own recruiting materials. It's companies and employers like you who will help keep the North Texas region a top place for business. And now I'd like to hand it over to Dale Petrovsky, President and CEO of the Dallas Regional Chamber, for closing remarks.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me, Brendan?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Brendan, for all you do for us. It's amazing what PNC does in education and what you do in this community, in the arts, and in every way. So thank you. I think Speaker Straus said it. When companies are looking to move to the Dallas region, right near the top of their list is high quality talent. They're looking for an educated and skilled workforce that can help that company grow and prosper. And that's what the employers are looking for. And that's what makes us so attractive to so many companies who have moved here. But we also have a moral obligation to provide a good education that leads to a good job and a good life for everyone in our region. And education is the key to success in our region, the key to long-term success in our region. We all now know that a quality education starts with those early years, the pre-K years. And this was such a great program to learn more about the importance of early ed from Speaker Straus. By the way, Amber, you were a natural. You did a great job with that interview. We learned from our panelists, Representative Anchia and Vicki and Dominique. Michael, you did a great job moderating. And we learned from Dr. Hinojosa. You know, when you step back and watch these folks in action, you realize we are so blessed by the leaders we have in this area. They live this. They think about these policies day and night. They want positive outcomes for the most people. And they're thoughtful and they're knowledgeable. And we're just so lucky to have them as leaders in our community. Thank you, Dr. Hinojosa, for making your exciting announcement about Legacy 2050 right here today. It's a great idea, very exciting. And thanks to our great friend and board member, again, Brendan McGuire and PNC Bank, do so much good in this community. A big thanks to all of our VIP sponsors, Dallas College, Joe May and Dallas College, incredible asset to our community, Texas Instruments, United Way, Educational First Steps. We look forward to seeing you at our 2021 annual meeting on Thursday, March 4th. That's coming up fast. It's the end of next week already. It's from 12 to 1. It's a virtual event. I know you're going to enjoy it. I get more excited every day watching it. And you can sign up on our website, and we'd love to have you join us. There'll be over 1,000 folks watching that. And you'll see a lot of the leaders of this community talking about what's going on both now and in the future in our community. I'd like to finish with a special shout out to Drex Owuzu, our Senior Vice President for Education and Workforce. Does such a great job running this area for the Chamber, and to his team. Michael Wood is a great asset to us. Elizabeth Caudill McLean, who works on higher education for us. And we have Sara, who just joined us recently to join that team. And we're just so proud of the work that they all do. So thank you, Drex, to you and your team. Thanks again for joining us today. Hope you'll enjoy the rest of your day now. So long.